The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.
Moody's Investors Service changed its outlook on Georgia BA2 credit rating to negative from stable. The agency said the decision reflects the heightened geopolitical event risks from Russia's ongoing military invasion of Ukraine, given Georgia's ongoing, albeit frozen, tensions with Russia over South Ossetia and Abkhazia, the unpredictability of Russia's strategic intentions in the region and Georgia's border with Russia. The affirmation of the ratings is underpinned by the solid fundamentals of Georgia's fiscal and monetary institutions, which are likely to allow the continuation of an effective macroeconomic policy response to any further COVID disruptions and to offset the negative economic impacts of slowing regional growth due to the ongoing conflict. Moody's expects 3.8% economic growth in Georgia this year, which is twice less than the 7.3% growth forecast made by the organization before the war. In addition, the credit agency estimates that economic growth in Georgia will average 4 to 5% in the coming years. On May 11, 2022, the Monetary Policy Committee of the National Bank of Georgia decided to keep the refinancing rate unchanged. The monetary policy rate is 11%. Elevated inflation and inflationary risks remain a recent global challenge. While inflationary processes were envisaged to stabilize in 2022, the Russian war against Ukraine created new risks. In particular, the sanctions imposed on Russia due to its military actions and supply-side disruptions have significantly increased prices of a number of product categories on international markets. Therefore, inflation increased significantly both in developed and developing countries. Global surge in prices was transmitted to the Georgian market as well, and despite the slowdown compared to the beginning of the year, inflation in Georgia remains high, and that's 12.8%. Had the aforementioned shock not materialized, sharp deceleration in inflation would have been expected. It should be noted that against the backdrop of the military activities, the external sector outlook is highly uncertain. At the same time, recent appreciation of lari supported the decrease in imported inflation. Moreover, while nominal wage growth rates have recently increased, total productivity is improving as well, meaning that at this stage there are no significant pressures on prices stemming from the labor market. According to the current forecast, other things equal, inflation will remain high over the course of the year. However, it will have a declining path as last year's one-off effects are phased out and given that monetary policy remains tight. Despite monetary policy tightening, though, credit activity remains strong, partly due to consumer loans on the one hand and foreign currency loans on the other. In response to the NBG, will keep the remuneration of reserve requirements on funds borrowed in the US dollar at 0%, even as the Fed funds rate increases. If necessary, in order to reduce the growth in foreign currency FX loans, the NBG may also introduce additional measures, including an increase in the upper bound of FX reserve requirements, currently at 25%. At the same time, recent macroprudential measures are expected to support the slowdown of current high growth in consumer lending. As for the aggregate demand, according to a revised forecast, the economy is expected to grow by about 4.5% in 2022. However, it should be noted that given current events, forecast uncertainty is particularly high. In response to rising inflationary risks, the gradual increase in the monetary policy rate over the past year has led to a tight monetary policy stance. Monetary policy will keep a tightening bias until the risks of rising inflation expectations are sufficiently mitigated, NBG said. Foreign demand continued significant recovery in the first quarter of 2022. However, risks in this direction remain high due to the war in Ukraine. According to the preliminary data, in January-March 2022, exports of goods have increased by 43% annually. In the same period, the revenues from international travel have increased approximately sevenfold year on year, although the decrease compared to the corresponding period of 2019 is still significant, and that's around 32%. Goods imports have also increased against the background of activated domestic demand by 36% annually in January-March 2022. The NBG continuously monitors the developments in the economy and financial markets and will use all available tools to ensure price stability, it said. The next meeting of the Monetary Policy Policy Committee will be held on June 22, 2022. By the way, Galt and Taggart earlier forecasted that the refinancing rate could reach 12%. The logic of the chief economist of the Georgian Investment Bank was that the NBG signal that the national bank in controlling inflation is important, although much of the inflation is caused not by demand but by supply. We think the national bank will have to raise its refinancing rate tomorrow. This can be up to 1 percentage point. The inflation forecast that we have, 10.5%, provides a certain tightening of the policy by the national bank, said Lasha Kaftaradze. The economist noted that the responsibility for reducing inflation in the country lies with the national bank and the government. Lasha Kaftaradze believes that it would be right if the government reduces the level of budget deficit this year. Monetary policy alone cannot alleviate the inflationary pressure we have. Fiscal policy is also important. The fiscal deficit from 2020 onwards is very high and it changes a lot in macroeconomics. This year, in order to alleviate the pressure, it is necessary to reduce the budget deficit. This will also give a positive opportunity. If we want inflation to be more or less subdued, fiscal and monetary policies must go in the same direction. No fiscal monetary policy can guarantee that inflation will return to 3% by the end of the year. But here it is important to see a downward trend, Lasha Kaftaradze stated. As of the next week, the Parliament will start discussing the report on the implementation of the 2022 state budget for 3 months. As chairman of the Budget and Finance Committee, Irakli Kovzanadze highlighted at the Parliament Bureau sitting, there has been a good GDP growth of 14.4% in the first 3 months of 2022, while the tax revenues exceeded the anticipated figures. Irakli Kovzanadze concentrated on a number of aspects of the state budget's execution. In January-March, budget receipts totaled 4,826 million lari. In terms of state budget tax receipts, which are always an indicator of how the economy is doing, we received more than we expected. The tax revenue plan in particular was overachieved. It increased by over 11 million lari, totaling 3,688 million lari. Profit tax was met by 124.1% according to taxes. VAT also exceeded the anticipated figures by 112.7%. The amount of the consumed money from the state budget is 4,266 million lari in the first 3 months of 2022, Irakli Kovzanadze clarified. The committee's conclusive meeting will take place on June the 1st.
The Checkpoint is presented by GM Pharma, the first international multinational pharmaceutical company in Georgia. GM Pharma, to serve those who need it most.